What is good, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video, and in this one I'm going to be talking about the one and only Tesla stock and what you should be looking after for the future. I'm also going to break down why tomorrow is going to be an absolutely massive day for the entire stock market and Tesla, because Jerome Powell himself is going to be speaking in front of Congress tomorrow morning. So I'm going to break down more details about that, what's going on with Tesla's share price, what the news, data, and technicals are telling us, and what you should be watching for tomorrow. Now, before I break anything down though, before I get into any more details, I do have to mention a couple of things before starting. Firstly, I'm not a financial planner. Make sure you take none of this as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire Tesla community as a whole. And the last thing is, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link down below in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo, the link down below, and deposit $100 into the account, you're guaranteed 7 free stocks, and 5 out of those 7 free stocks could be a free Tesla share. It's a limited time offer. It ends in just 3 weeks. Make sure you check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. Tesla's down 2% for the day, closed very close to where I predicted it would close. I told you guys yesterday that Tesla would likely see a pretty decent open, then we'd actually sell off as the day goes on. I also told you that Tesla would likely stop very close to where gap support is, not coming all the way down to fill this gap, closing around this like 195 area, maybe a little bit lower. That's almost exactly where Tesla ended up closing. So the real question is, where is Tesla going to close for tomorrow? What is likely going to happen? And I personally cannot tell you anything with very high levels of confidence, because it very briefly will depend on what Jerome Powell ends up saying. So looking at the overall market, you have to remember that Powell is going to be speaking in front of Capitol Hill, or in front of Congress, tomorrow morning. And this is going to be very important for the Fed's monetary policy. He's going to be basically interrogated, and he's going to have to actually answer some very important questions. Now, one of the problems with Jerome Powell was he told us there's disinflation. Disinflation is here. But when you look at the last CPI, PPI, and PCE reports that came out, they ended up being higher than expected. So Powell did lose a lot of credibility there. And now what he says will be very important for the Fed's reputation, and also for what the Fed is doing as well. I want to note to everyone that if Powell does end up being dovish, it won't necessarily work in his favor if the next CPI report that comes out, if the next reports that come out are hotter than expected. Looking at some gas data, we actually saw another increase in gas prices for February. It was actually a slight increase relative to the increase from December to January. So, with that said, I don't truly know how bad inflation is going to be for the next report, but there's a good chance that core might be a little bit hotter, meaning that if you look at CPI or PCE or whatever without looking at like food and energy, it could still be relatively hot. That's what the data right here is suggesting. Now, this tells me that we might see another uptick in inflation, and Jerome Powell knows this. So once again, it does not work in Jerome Powell's favor if he ends up using the word disinflation again. I don't really see him doing that. The odds are technically a little bit more in the favor of Powell being a little bit more on the hawkish side. That's just my honest opinion, and this will have a big effect on how the overall market ends up moving. So Powell is going to be speaking once again at 10 o'clock a.m. tomorrow. That's going to be in Eastern time, right? 30 minutes after the market opens tomorrow, Powell's going to be up there and he's going to be talking. It's going to move the market big time. Expect some crazy volatility. I also want to note that there's going to be a lot of stress for investors when he talks. So the volatility being crazy, it's not going to be very clear which direction the market chooses immediately. We don't truly know, and the market will be very reactive to what he ends up saying. Once again, like I said, the odds are favoring him being a little bit more on the hawkish side, but if he does end up saying anything about a pause, the exact opposite could happen and the market could still continue to rally. But the odds are a little bit more in favor of the market pulling back even more. I'm going to break that down in just a couple of minutes. I also want to note that on SPY, when you look at the options chain, we did actually have a relatively high put to call ratio for today because of the 0 day to expiration options that were bought. And we saw a lot of puts being bought. And this actually did contribute to the market pushing down just a little bit, because lots of market makers ended up hedging because of the quick expirations by actually selling 100 shares. That's why when you see way too much put buying in just one day, that could happen. But I also want to note that there are already lots of put expirations that are very high in value for Friday. So I do believe that for Friday, if the market makers are watching this, they're incentivized to actually let the market slow down a bit, maybe for Tuesday and Wednesday, but it would work in their favor if they try to push the market up by Friday. That's a possibility, right? If it wasn't for Jerome Powell, I would probably tell you guys that the market could, calm down a little bit this week and then start to push up near the end of the week. But I can't guarantee that, because if we see lots of capitulation after Powell speaks, if he causes the whole market to actually come down hard, then all of this could be invalidated and the market makers could still lose money regardless. Okay. So I want you all to be prepared for this. I will break this down in the charts in a couple of minutes. But first, let's talk about some news affecting Tesla. So, like I told you guys, we saw some headlines coming out today. Tesla recalls 3,470 Model Y vehicles. Other articles were actually a little bit less truthful about this, saying there's another recall, this and that. Teslas aren't as safe. Once again, guys, be very careful with what you read. The recall did happen. I did talk about this recently, and that is part of why Tesla did underperform a bit. Not necessarily that big of a piece of news, though, because it's only like 3,470 cars over a Bolt issue. But besides that, there was actually another big headline that came out, and that's the fact that Tesla actually slashed many of their premium Model S and Model X models by up to $10,000, right? And this is not, I wouldn't say this is a bad piece of news. Once again, I'll explain exactly why. We actually saw them cut prices of the Model S and X by about $5,000 or 5.2%, and then $10,000 or 9.1%. But once again, these are their expensive premium models, so it's not really that big of a deal in my opinion. Now, remember what happened the last time Tesla did these massive price cuts? Look at the inventory levels. I have the inventory levels for the Model Y. This is going to be the default version and a couple of others, but looking at it, Tesla's stock crashed in the middle of January. We saw a big drop in Tesla because Tesla cut their prices by a large margin. Then what happened was the inventory levels, they were actually going up very high, and they ended up actually coming down and down and down because demand ended up increasing. So if you cut prices and there's actually relatively high demand for a product, but demand ends up decreasing because of that, with supply necessarily not keeping up with it, that in turn could actually lead to prices going up. We actually saw the opposite play out. We had relatively high supply, demand was a little low, and prices were still at these like relatively high levels. So when Tesla cut the prices very high, aggregate demand ended up increasing, thus bringing down the inventory levels as more and more of the Teslas were being bought up. You could see right here, even very recently, we actually saw a big increase in inventory just a couple of days ago by 290 Teslas, and these just got bought up pretty quickly as the backlog of orders does continue. What does this tell me? Tesla has premium cars. They're cutting prices. That is good news. That's good news because it's going to increase the odds of these cars being bought more. Tesla knows that this will affect their margins, but they're willing to take the risk. And so far, this has been working on their benefit based off the chart right here and based on previous pieces of data. All right. So even if Tesla did sell off because of that, even if it did play a bit of a role, it's not the end of the world. If anything, for the longer term, it will help Tesla become more and more efficient and closer to reaching their goals. Now, also, we saw the news that came out that says Tesla begins deliveries of the vehicles with the hardware for a computer. This to me is once again another good piece of news because the upgraded computer has much more capabilities than the hardware 3. Now, in my opinion, this once again makes the cars more efficient. It actually has more camera ports available. And when that happens, this allows the vision to be a lot more focused on the self-driving quest and other technologies like that. We could even see them reintroduce the radar and the radar heater. So in my opinion, I consider this once again pretty good news. And I do believe that the new computer that's a lot more upgraded will lead to more functionalities, more visualization improvements. And this in turn could actually help Tesla customers, their customer service, and etc. We have some details about the Gigafactory in Mexico. I actually broke a lot of these down beforehand, but there's some more meticulous ones that came out. We can see right over here that right now we have the project that's actually going to start very soon. The governor confirmed that Tesla secured about 4,200 acres of land. That's twice the land size that Tesla used to build the Gigafactory in Texas. So that's some very good news. It's also going to be very close to some very important material factories. And they're also going to spend about $5 billion to build the factory. There are many phases of construction, and they should be employing over 7,000 people. I saw other headlines saying that by next year, they could be starting to deliver cars. So that's some very bullish news for the longer term. For the short term, we actually saw this news come out already, so it's no surprise. So once again, it's not affecting Tesla as much. Tesla had below average volume at 128 million. That's below the average of 181 million. And we did actually drop on that, which shows how sensitive Tesla is to even less volume. Now, the short volume percentage, it's been pretty flat right now, but I do believe it's going to decrease just a little bit. We're at 53%, telling me that we actually saw another slight increase in shorting and also selling pressure for the stock, which means that a lot of the demand is swifting and kind of like switching away in a bit. So right now, investors are very like flat right now. They're not like buying too hard. They're not selling way too hard either. It's very close to almost 50-50, a little bit more in favor of the sellers. Now, on top of that, we're also seeing the price per ratio starting to decline a bit, showing us signs that Tesla's starting to underperform a bit. It was overbought in the past, and it needs another catalyst to continue pushing. But once again, it's going to depend heavily on Jerome Powell whether he causes the market to pump or not. Jefferies is giving Tesla a buy rating. That is a pretty good sign, but other big analysts are giving Tesla neutral ratings. So we're kind of in the middle right there. Now, one weird coincidence is Elon Musk actually tweeted this. I'm not going to go over the joke. I know it's kind of corny, but anyways, when it comes to the joke, Elon Musk is posting another picture of a bear. One thing I noticed is he's been posting a lot of bears recently. I think last week and 2 weeks ago there were two bears on his Twitter. This is the third one in just the last couple of weeks. This tells me that maybe he's thinking something else other than the jokes that he's trying to make. There could be another motive out there. But, anyways, I don't want to talk too much about that. I mean, maybe he has an opinion that Tesla could slow down. He's been doing it for the last few weeks, and we could see Tesla has been on a bit of a downtrend for the last few weeks. Correlation does not mean causation, though Elon Musk might not be thinking that. I just wanted to put that out there. It's just a possibility if you are a conspiracy theorist. For Tesla, though, let's talk about something else that's important. This thing's down 2%. Are we going to continue dropping or are we going to bounce? That, in my opinion, is going to depend heavily on Jerome Powell. If the market turns bullish, okay, you have to watch for SPY to fill the gap at 408, then continue to push into the 410s. If the market turns bearish off Jerome Powell, then we're likely going to see us downtrend, continue with the downtrend, and fill this gap down here in the 398 to 397 zone. Then continue to downtrend and maybe try to bounce off this trend line around the mid 390s. What do I think is going to happen though? In my opinion, when you look at the hourly time frame, you will notice we have a bearish divergence that has been developing over the last few weeks, meaning that when you look at where the price was at this 415 level, I know this is a little hard to see, but the 415 level on SPY, the RSI was in the like 60s, the 50s and 60s over and over again. Then Tesla came, not Tesla, SPY came all the way down to 392. Then this thing got a bounce, but notice how we established a lower high than before. The high is lower, the high we made today is lower, but the RSI is a lot more overbought. So right now the price is on the downtrend, the RSI was on an uptrend. This is confirming a bearish divergence, and this tells me from a technical standpoint the market might have even more downside to come. Now, once again, I can't promise anything, okay? It all depends on what Powell ends up saying. He could actually surprise us and say things that cause the market to pump. I really don't know. All right, I have to be honest. But from a technical standpoint, and based off what we saw from CPI and the other inflationary measure reports for the month of January, to me, it's clear the odds are favoring Powell being a little bit more on the hawkish side and not pumping the markets too much. I think it's a little bit more likely the market's going to slow down. The MACD is getting very tight. We might see the market slow down and come all the way down to the high 390s for SPY, thus bringing the market down. For the triple Q, I'm seeing a very similar story. It actually came very close to my target. I said this thing can break above 300 just a little bit. We came to about 304, then we got a rejection back to 300. In my opinion, there is this gap way down here in the mid 290s. There's a chance this gap could get filled if Powell is more on the hawkish side. I don't know for sure, but I just want to put that out there. Now, if we're bullish, this thing could bounce off 300 and start pushing all the way up to even higher levels. I know there's another gap up there in the like 310s, I believe, or it's actually about there's 304, then there's space around like 309. If you're bullish, you could see this thing fly past 304 to get to like 309. If you're bearish, you're going to be looking for a lower gap fill followed by a continuation into the 290s, if not lower. Now, when it comes to the overall technicals, this is identical to SPY. The triple Q also has a bearish divergence that's developing, telling me that the odds are favoring Powell being a little bit more hawkish and causing the market to drop even more, thus bringing the QQQ down to the 290s. This is likely going to be correlated with both Apple and Tesla. So I will talk about Tesla in a few. But looking at the VIX, this thing did almost exactly what I predicted. I told you the VIX would come down to about the low 18, if not 17.8 level. Then this thing would try to bounce a little bit. And that's what happened. We're actually up 0.65% on the VIX. If the VIX remains bullish and this thing does end up pushing up thanks to Powell, well, this is going to happen because of how the market responds. But we could actually analyze the VIX to give us a good amount of information. If the market comes down because of Powell, we could see the VIX enter the 19s again. That's a very important level, especially after a bounce very close to 18. But if the market ends up pushing up thanks to Powell, the VIX could technically come all the way down to 17.8, maybe retest the upper trend line right here around the 17s. The odds are favoring, though, that the VIX might try to revisit the 19s, and that doesn't mean that the VIX is like dictating the market. It's more like the VIX is going to be dictated by the market, and the market might essentially come down a bit, thus pushing the VIX up even more. Finally, for the dollar index, I told you all the dollar would likely hit the low. Let me just find it. My dollar index would hit the low 104 area. That is almost exactly what happened today. We saw this thing hit the low 104, got a nice bounce off that. And this thing started pushing up just a little bit as the market came down. We could see this thing try to push all the way up to the 104.5 zone and maybe try to get above the major resistance line around this. This is a 104.7 around there. We could see this thing try to bounce. If that happens, once again, it could be bearish for the stock market. If Powell hints at the Fed tightening more, we could see the dollar index push up more, right, as the dollar responds to that. But if Powell uses the word pause again and again, that's also a possibility. The whole market could still pump. It's a possibility. But I don't really think that's very likely. I mean, why would he be talking so much about the pause when we're seeing inflation being high? I think he needs to focus more on the reality of the situation. That is, we're likely going to get a second wave of high inflation, and the Fed has to continue to tighten to help offset that. Now, for Tesla, what am I essentially seeing? For Tesla, we do have this gap above. This gap is around this 201, 202 area. I believe that if Powell pumps the market, if he hypothetically causes the market to push up, if he does, BS something or whatever, Tesla could push up to fill this gap around the 202 area. It could retest the upper trend line around the 205 zone. That's going to be a very important level, 202, then 205 for Tesla. It could do that if Powell does cause a big rally in the markets tomorrow. But if Powell is very hawkish, if he does cause the market to crash, watch Tesla come all the way down to fill this gap, then actually see a retest of this 186 to 189 zone. That's a very important demand zone for Tesla. If 186 does not hold, if it's that bad, there's also a gap in the very low 180s. I think it's like around 182. I'm going to be watching that potential gap to get filled. That could end up happening around this 182 area, and it's a very important level. Now, what do I think is going to happen to Tesla? I believe tomorrow it's going to be crazy in the morning. There're going to be lots of fake outs. The first 30 minutes are going to be fun. Tesla might try to trade sideways, maybe push up a little bit, and then the odds are favoring. Once again, be prepared for anything, but the odds are favoring Tesla coming all the way down to fill this gap, all the way down to the low 190s, and maybe retesting the demand zone around this 186 to 189 level. So even if Powell does cause the market to come down, it does not mean we're crashing just yet, because we still have to wait for CPI and other factors. The market could be establishing, I'm talking about SPY right here, the SPY could be establishing a higher low than 392. It could come all the way down to the low 400s, maybe the high 390s, and try to bounce off that later on. We don't know for sure yet, and it really depends on what Powell says. I also want to remind everyone that Powell is speaking 2 days in a row. He's going to be speaking tomorrow, once again at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time, in front of the House, I believe, and then in front of the Senate the day after, so on Wednesday. All right, guys. So with that said, thank you all so much for listening. For Tesla, be prepared for anything the bullish and bearish cases I said. But like I said before, the odds are favoring Powell being a little bit more hawkish and maybe causing Tesla to come down to fill this gap and maybe retesting the demand zone. I do not truly know what he's going to do. I have to be honest with you. Please be ready for it. Nobody could actually predict it perfectly, but the odds are favoring more downside for the markets, at least for the time being. All right. Thank you all so much for listening. Please have an absolutely incredible rest of the day. Remember to remain calm, cool, and collected when trading in the markets and etc. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Tesla to the moon, because the long-term future is still incredibly bright. And peace out.